Okay, now just to begin with a brief review of last week. We have gone so far through the idea that there are three midos to the Ribono Shel Olam, three dispositions or characteristics of the Ribono Shel Olam. In other words, that He displays toward the Bria, toward mankind. And we see that the first midah, which is Chesed, is essentially the disposition to allow Hatova flow. In other words, the characteristics of the Ribono Shel Olam, that the Hatova, the natural tendency of the Ribono Shel Olam, which is His flow of Hatova, goodness or benevolence, that this benevolent flow is allowed, number one, and number two, that it's allowed completely, which means that it's unlimited, it's infinite, and it's unconditional. In other words, that it's not conditional upon any other idea, that it flows without any kind of condition. Now, the second midah which we had gone through is Gvura. And Gvura, which of course is strength, that is the second midah, and that is basically or essentially the disposition to withhold the Hatova flow. In other words, that there should be no flow of Hatova to be withheld. It's restricted. And the second idea is that this Hatova flow, this flow of benevolence from the Ribono Shel Olam to the Nivroim, to creations, is completely withheld. That is the essential idea of Gvura, which is the second midah. So we see that basically both Gvura and Chesed are either to allow the Hatova flow completely, or to restrict or to withhold the Hatova flow completely. So we're really dealing with either Gvura or Chesed, or rather Chesed or Gvura, in terms of the extremes. Therefore, we need a third midah, which is Tiferes. And Tiferes is basically a composite of the midah of Chesed and Gvura. It's not a new kind of activity or action on the part of the Ribono Shel Olam. It's not a new midah at all, but rather a composite of Chesed and Gvura. Also, but essentially what Tiferes means is that there are no extremes in either Chesed or Gvura. In other words, that the Chesed and the Gvura do not manifest any extremes at all. Therefore, there is no excessive Chesed and there is no severe Gvura, which would be either pure Chesed or pure Gvura. Rather, we see that there is a disposition for partialness, where the Ribono Shel Olam allows both Chesed and Gvura, but not complete in terms of the extremes, but in the sense of partialness, that they both can partially operate. In other words, both are allowed to operate, and therefore everything can come into existence. So therefore, this is what Tiferes is. It's that disposition for partialness, no extremes, of both Chesed and Gvura, which of course is the components of Tiferes. As a result of all this, we see that the will of the Ribono Shel Olam, His Ratzon, is fulfilled in terms of four ideas. The first idea is Bria, that there can be a creation at all. The second idea is that there can be a subsistence or a maintenance of that existence, which is the kiyum of the Bria. The third idea is that there can be a Hatova, a true benevolent flow to created beings. And the fourth idea is that this Hatova can be b'shlemus, that this Hatova can be accompanied, or rather can be experienced by the Nivroim, the created beings, without any kind of loss of self-respect or embarrassment or whatever. Therefore, the Hatova is called Hatova Shlema. Therefore, as a result of Tiferes, which is a mediating attribute, we now can have the kiyum of the Ribono Shel Olam's Ratzon in all four areas. Also, what was mentioned is the concept called kiyum Tamidus, which means that since we know that Tiferes will initially relegate the amount of Hatova according to Din, which is Lefi Ma'asav, according to the actions of the Nivroim, and according to those actions, if they be good, then they get Hatova, and if they be bad, they do not get Hatova. There's an absence of Hatova. This, of course, is called absolute Din. In other words, when Hatova is distributed according to the acts of man, absolutely, this is absolute Din. And we know that the universe could not exist with this absolute Din, because as soon as a man sinned, the universe would cease to be. Therefore, there is a further need in terms of Tiferes, in order that the universe should exist continuously, Kim Tmidis. And therefore, what we begin to see is that the Gevura is more mitigated in the sense that it is more Hatava, or the opposite way of looking at it is that Chesed is less restricted. Therefore, again, there's more Hatava. As a result of that, we see the concept called relative din, because there is still justice in the sense that ultimately everything has to be fulfilled through justice, but we see relative din because there is a negation of absolute din. In other words, din is not always able to function absolutely in order the universe should exist. And this is, of course, is called rachmim, or mercy or compassion. This is briefly what I had spoken about last week. Now, in this year, I'm going to summarize and finish the ideas of the attributes of the Ribono Shel Olam. Now, if you recall, a while back, several weeks ago, I had introduced this series of shurim by 6 questions. And these questions, of course, address themselves to this topic, namely the attributes of the Ribono Shel Olam, in terms of the way he relates, or in terms of the way he reveals himself to creation. And what I'd like to do now is to go through those 6 questions and answer them, and that will be a summary of all the shurim previously in terms of the attributes of the Ribono Shel Olam, in terms of the previous 6 shurim. And then afterwards, I'll discuss one more idea of the attribute, and we'll conclude that with a shir. Now, what was the first question that I had asked previously? The first question was, what are the fundamental midos or attributes of the Ribono Shel Olam? These are the original questions. What are the fundamental or the basic ideas in terms of the attributes of God, in terms of his characteristics, how he manifests himself to creation? What we saw then, and now we can begin to answer these questions, that we see that his true mitziusoi, his true atzmusoi, the true nature of God, of course, is not knowable. But we know that the Ribono Shel Olam has revealed to us that tuvoi, the idea that God is totally and completely good at all times, Tev Hashem lakol, it says, v'rachmo kol ma'asov, that the Ribono Shel Olam is good to all and at all times. Therefore, the Ribono Shel Olam revealed to us that this tuvoi, this aspect of his being good, benevolent, giving this state of well-being, of course, to his creations, is identical to his mitziusoi, which means that when the presence of God is felt, one immediately feels a tremendous state of well-being, tuvoi, or benevolence. When, of course, the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam is withheld or concealed, then one, of course, does not feel the state of well-being. Then we have the absence of tuvoi. Therefore, we see, as revealed by the Ribono Shel Olam, that his tuvoi, his goodness, is synonymous or identical, and always appears with, or occurs with, the mitzius of the Ribono Shel Olam, the presence of God. Therefore, we see that Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes are the 3 fundamental attributes of God. And now we understand that all 3 attributes are not different actions. For instance, what you'd see in an individual. A person has many different attributes and many different actions. But we see that Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes all pivot around Hatova. One means the excessive flow of Hatova, Chesed. Gevura means the complete absence of Hatova. And Tiferes, of course, is that mediating attribute where you have partial Hatova. And of course, it's regulated by Din, which is the actions of man. Therefore, we see that the midas of the Ribono Shel Olam are 3 in number, all of them centering or pivoting around the aspect of tuvoi, which is synonymous, which is with his mitziusoi, or his presence. This is what we see. Therefore, we begin to understand that when you talk about God's attributes, you're really talking about only one, either tuvoi, his benevolence, or the absence of his benevolence. There is no other midah in terms of the Ribono Shel Olam's relationship to the Bria. And even if you begin to see others, it's only in the sense of his presence of his tuvoi or the absence of his tuvoi. This is the way the Nevroim experience the Ribono Shel Olam. Therefore, if you see the tuvoi, the presence of his goodness, that of course is the essential attribute of God. When you see the absence of tuvoi, that itself is ultimately for the good. The reason why the Ribono Shel Olam will absent his tuvoi is itself only for tuvoi. In other words, that if the God hides His presence, that man should have a test. That itself is that when God finally gives tuvoy to man, as a result of man's accomplishments on the test, that tuvoy, of course, will be experienced without embarrassment. So one sees that even the absence of tuvoy of the Rebbeinu Shalom is ultimately for tuvoy. Therefore, we come to the conclusion, of course, that all the attributes of God are basically one. Either its presence of tuvoy, of goodness, or the absence of goodness, which of course ultimately bring the creations to tuvoy bishlemus, in a perfect way. That's the concept called yichud midosav, the complete absolute unity of all the attributes of God. And I've indicated not only the attributes, what are the fundamental attributes, but of course the statement that they are all fundamentally one. Now, that was the first question. The next question that was asked was, what is the structure of these midos, of these attributes? And the idea that was presented, that the structure of these midos is basically that chesed, or kindness, exists on the right side. And I'll explain right side of what. The gevura, which is of course strength, the attribute of strength, exists on the left side, or is depicted on the left side. And Tiferes, which is the mediating attribute, it's a mediating midah, of course, exists in the center, which is where it should be, because it's really in between. It's in between chesed and gevura. It's a midah, a disposition that partializes, that makes possible chesed and gevura to operate, in the sense that both partially are fulfilled. That is the structure of the midas. The third question which I had asked was, what is the significance of this arrangement? The fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom has these three midas, and the way they are displayed, what is the significance of this particular kind of structure or configuration? And the answer to that, of course, is one of the most profound principles in all Yiddishkeit, and that is that the totality of the attributes of God and the actions of God, both His midos and His pulos, the totality, the configuration of these attributes and actions is called Odom Kadmoin, first man or original man. And the idea, of course, was that the Rebbeinu Shalom, who is not knowable, has revealed Himself to be understood in a certain way. And that way is called Odom Kadmoin. And Odom Kadmoin is the totality of all these attributes and actions. In other words, Odom Kadmoin is the guise of man. It's the design of man. In other words, the design or the appearance of a man is really a concept. It's an idea of which man happens to resemble, which I'll get into. But the essential idea is that Odom Kadmoin is this guise of the Rebbeinu Shalom as he appears to Nevroim. So therefore that is synonymous with the idea called Dmus Odom, the appearance or likeness of a man, Suras Odom, the form of a man. In other words, this idea of Odom Kadmoin, as I said, is really a concept. And the way the Rebbeinu Shalom appears, or his guise to Nevroim, is this idea of Odom Kadmoin. And not, of course, Chas v'Shalom, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is a man in any way. But the idea is that when the Rebbeinu Shalom revealed himself to the Bria, he revealed himself in a certain kind of personality structure. And that personality structure is called Odom Kadmoin. And in Odom Kadmoin, or rather through Odom Kadmoin, in that particular personality structure, that's the way he reveals himself to the Bria. And the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom relates with the universe, the created universe, in that form that is independent of man's true physiology and anatomy. Whether man looks the way he does or looks like something else, the Rebbeinu Shalom appears to the Bria as an Odom Kadmoin. In other words, the concept of Odom Kadmoin is independent, really, of the concept of man's form himself. This is the important idea that was explained in the previous shurim. So that sort of answers the question of what is the significance of this arrangement, of this particular kind of configuration of the Rebbeinu Shalom's midos and pu'ulos, his attributes and his actions. And the answer to that was, of course, that this is called Odom Kadmoin, and that is the way he reveals himself to the Bria. In other words, this Odom Kadmoin is the prototype of which man is merely formed in that particular kind of image. In other words, as I explained previously, when the Rebbeinu Shalom appears to the Bria, if you had to identify the Rebbeinu Shalom as a particular Nivra, okay, then you would say that he most resembles an invisible man, because the Rebbeinu Shalom thinks, he communicates, he reasons, he has knowledge, he has memory, he has attributes, anger, love, mercy, compassion, and so on. So therefore, we would identify the Rebbeinu Shalom, if we had to point at him and say, what does he resemble most in this physical universe, we would say he resembles a man. That's what the idea of Adam Kadmon is, that this idea of man, this totality of attributes, is the Adam Kadmon, and this is the way the Rebbeinu Shalom reveals himself to the Bria. And I had mentioned previously, in terms of why God reveals himself in this particular dmus, or appearance or likeness, is unknown. But the fact is that he does, and this is what he revealed himself to us. And I had mentioned that in the Ma'aseh Merkava, that God is metamorphosized as an Adam on top of the chariot. That's the idea of Adam Kadmon. Now, question 4. The fourth question which I had asked is, how does man relate to this structure? Okay, we know that the configuration of the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom is that of an Adam Kadmon. How does man supposed to relate to that structure? Because obviously, that is the applicability to man, that man would relate to that structure in some way. And the answer to that is that basically, essentially, what has to be is that man must be v'holachta b'drochov. You have to imitate, you have to emulate his ways. Okay? Or lihdames b'drochov, as the Rambam says, to imitate, to personify the Rebbeinu Shalom's ways, which of course means both the attributes of God, the midos, and the actions of God, his pulos. Both of these ideas must be imitated or personified by a man. In other words, that this idea of Adam Kadmon, man has to coincide with this concept of Adam Kadmon, which is the personality guise of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the way he appears to the Bria. So therefore, man has to coincide with this particular personality of the Rebbeinu Shalom. In other words, he has to resemble this Adam Kadmon completely. This is the idea of a holachta b'drochov, and that is the application of the concept of Adam Kadmon, of course, to the Nivroim. And that is why we find Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, each one, of course, intensely taking one midah, even though they had all the midas. Avram intensely had his avodah, had chesed, Yitzchak had gevura, and Yaakov had tiferes. Because, of course, the main idea was that they have to resemble the Rebbeinu Shalom completely. And there are certain other ideas which I'll talk about when I get into Yitzchak, in terms of the others. Now, therefore, we come to the conclusion that what man has to do is that he has to be mashlim. He has to fulfill, complete, perfect this Adam Kadmon. In other words, we know that the body itself, the human body, is a physical manifestation of the design of the Adam Kadmon. In other words, if Adam Kadmon was manifested or expressed itself in physical terms, it would look exactly like the physiology and anatomy of a human being. That's the metaphor, the human metaphor, or the physical metaphor for the Adam Kadmon of the Rebbeinu Shalom, which is an entire different idea, or rather it's for another shir, exactly the resemblance and so on. But we do know that man already automatically resembles partially the Rebbeinu Shalom's Adam Kadmon, or his dmus, because his physical body is really a manifestation or expression of that Adam Kadmon, which of course is the guise of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And we know that the body completely, in all its anatomical structure and its functioning, is nothing more than a composite of all the attributes and actions of God. In other words, man is really a mini model of the entire Bria. Therefore, man has to be mashlim that, because not only is he physically resemble the entire universe and the Rebbeinu Shalom, but man's actions and his dispositions, if he acts upon that, if he adopts the midos and the pulos, the attributes and the acts of God, then what happens is he completes the resemblance to Adam Kadmon, because not only does he look like Adam Kadmon in a physical way, right, he also acts like Adam Kadmon. because he is emulating or personifying the midas of the Ribono Shel Olam, right? His attributes, and the actions of the Ribono Shel Olam, his actions. Therefore, a man has to successfully resemble completely the Adam Kadmon, and he does that by by imitating the ways of the Ribono Shel Olam. And therefore, as a result of that, he is completely mashlim. He completely perfects his deficient image, right? Because he's created as a partial Adam Kadmon, physically, and he has to complete that idea by actually emulating or acting in the manner that Adam Kadmon acts. And Adam Kadmon, of course, being the guise of the Ribono Shel Olam. Therefore, when all is said and done, when man finishes the avodah, if he finishes, which of course he never does, but certainly as he proceeds on it, he resembles Adam Kadmon more and more, not only physically, but in terms of the actual behavior of Adam Kadmon. And this is the essential ideal concept in terms of the Obus emulating the Ribono Shel Olam, and of course in terms of all Jews emulating the Ribono Shel Olam. What's important to add is that when we speak about being mashlim, the Adam Kadmon, that each individual has to emulate and personify, and not only does he do that, of course, in terms of his physical manifestation, right, but also in the way he behaves, so therefore he is a total Adam Kadmon. Each Jew, of course, contributes uniquely to the completion of the shleimus of Adam Kadmon, because each Jew has a different task. He is assigned a specific role or specific area where he's masakin the bria, and therefore he is created in his set. He is created in that set. In other words, he's created with the exact dispositions, midas, and the exact potentialities, and the exact situation where he's born, in other words, in order to enable him to masakin, to correct the aspect of the bria that needs correction. Only he uniquely can do so. Therefore, in that sense, Adam Kadmon consists of the totality of all the different tasks that are assigned to all the different Jews. Therefore, when each Jew, not only is he mashlim Adam Kadmon in terms of his own unique contribution, but when all Jews together are masakin the bria, in other words, they all do what they have to do, whether it be through mitzvahs, tshuva, or yisurin, which are the three ways you can masakin the bria. When all Jews then do all three, or rather, when they all do it completely, then you have the hashlomo of Adam Kadmon completely, not only in terms of each Jew's unique contribution, but in terms of the eventual configuration or gestalt of tikkun, as of course manifested by the avodah of all Jews. That's what I just wanted to add. Now, so therefore, this is the idea of Adam Kadmon and man's relationship to that Adam Kadmon, that he has to basically personify the Adam Kadmon, and as a result of that, and this is exactly, of course, what the Ovis did, and as a result of that, there is a shleimus in Adam Kadmon, as I said, not only in terms of each Jew's shleimus in Adam Kadmon, resembling that Adam Kadmon, but in terms of the total contribution of all Jews, Adam Kadmon, of course, is b'shleimus. Now, the fifth question which was asked is of why are the midas of man similar to the Ribono Shel Olam? How come we find that man's attributes and his behavior and so on are so similar to God's? Well, now the answer is obvious, because God created man exactly the way he relates to the bria. Therefore, he is similar to God. The question is very simply answered. In other words, since man was made in the exact same guise that the Ribono Shel Olam appears to the bria, namely Adam Kadmon, therefore, as a result of that, man therefore resembles the Ribono Shel Olam completely. And since we know Adam Kadmon is the totality of all the attributes of God and His actions, in terms of the way we see Him, as I had mentioned previously, that the Ribono Shel Olam relates to the bria as a thinking being, as a communicating being, as a being who manifests tzedakah and chesed and so on, also who manifests the attributes of kindness and anger and jealousy and so on, what we see. Therefore, man has the exact same ideas. But in the Ribono Shel Olam, of course, they're all toiv. And the idea is that man has to make all these attributes also toiv, even jealousy and anger and so on. Now, therefore, this is the idea why the midas of the man, of course, are similar to the Ribono Shel Olam. And the reason why man was created in the image of God, in the guise that the Rebbeinu Shalom appears to the Bria, is because the Rebbeinu Shalom, to show the chashivas, the importance that man has in terms of the central idea of the universe, that he is the central feature of the universe. The universe was created for his sake. Therefore, to show that significance, the Rebbeinu Shalom, out of love, created him in his exact image. Okay? Because, of course, man will be the recipient of that good. That's what it means, that man is, the primary reason for the entire existence of all creation. So, therefore, to show him that significance, the Rebbeinu Shalom, and to significance that he is the pivot of the entire Bria, the Rebbeinu Shalom, of course, created him in his image, and therefore man, of course, resembles him. So, therefore, question 5 is answered. Now, question 6 was, what does Tselem Elokim mean? And now we know what Tselem Elokim means. The image of God is the same or synonymous with Dmus Adam, the likeness of a man, which is the exact same idea as Suras Adam, the form of a man, which is the same term as Tselem Elokim, which is the same term as Adam Kadmon. All these ideas mean the image of God. And when it says Nasa Adam b'Tzalmeinu k'Nuseinu, let us make man in our image, of course that's what it means, that the Rebbeinu Shalom, because of the chashivas, the importance that man has in this universe, therefore God made man in his image, in order to mashlim, to complete that Adam Kadmon. So therefore, Tselem Elokim means Adam Kadmon, which of course means the totality of all the attributes and actions that is manifested to creation. In other words, that is revealed to man. And all these attributes and actions that the Rebbeinu Shalom has in relating to the Bria, this is Adam Kadmon, which is synonymous with Tselem Elokim. We have now answered all the 6 questions that I originally asked in the beginning of the Shurim on the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And this basically is a summary of all the Shurim, and we now see, we have a good understanding of the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom, his midos, in other words, his actions or pulos, and the relationship that man has with this, and some of the fundamental ideas of the entire configuration of the Bria, why it was set up in such a manner. And I had gone into this, even though what I'm really doing is talking about the Mashiach, the Messianic concept, as the pivotal or fundamental theme of all Jewish history. I had gone into the ideas of the attributes of God, because I had left off with the Avos, that each one fundamentally emulated the Rebbeinu Shalom in a special way, and I wanted to go into what exactly did they emulate and why was it so important. And this was the reason why I digressed in terms of the attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom. So this completes basically the 6 questions. Now, I want to, however, sort of conclude the shurim on the attributes by asking 2 questions. We know that there are Yud Gimel Midas, that there are 13 attributes of God. We know that by the Egel, when Klal Yisrael did a sin by the golden calf, by the Egel, so the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to destroy Klal Yisrael. So he told Moshe Rabbeinu, so Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for Klal Yisrael, and then God revealed to him the 13 attributes that he has. So the question is, we know that there are 3, Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes. Why then are there 13? In other words, what is the relationship between the Yud Gimel Midas that was revealed to Moshe, and which we say in davening every day, and also what is the relation between these Yud Gimel Midas and the 3 Midas which were discussed previously? Second idea is that the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan said that the Rebbeinu Shalom appeared to Moshe Rabbeinu as a chazan in a talis, as a cantor, as a chazan, wrapped up in a prayer shawl, which of course doesn't mean that Moshe Rabbeinu saw God that way. It means that the manifestation that the Rebbeinu Shalom expressed himself to Moshe, and he understood that this was the way. It's like a Nevi'us prophecy, when a prophet sees God in a certain form, like God is a man riding on a horse. Of course, God is not a man riding on a horse, but he sees him a certain way, because man riding on a horse symbolizes a certain idea, and the prophetic vision, of course, tells him that idea. So Moshe Rabbeinu perceived the Nevuah, of course, the Rebbeinu Shalom wrapped in a prayer shawl, which of course communicates to him certain concepts about the Rebbeinu Shalom. And the Rebbe Shem said to Moshe in that guise, and he said to him, the Yud Gimel Midas, the 13 attributes of the Rebbe Shem. And he said to him that Kol Zman She Yisrael Choitem, whenever the Jews sin, Yaseh Lefonai Kesed Hazeh, let them perform before me this particular arrangement of these 13 attributes. V'ani moichel lehem, and I will pardon them, I'll forgive them. So the question, of course, is, why is it that if you say the Yud Gimel Midas, God is moichel you? It doesn't sound. It seems to be a very easy form of mechila, of getting a kapara, in terms of the fact that you just say it and God, of course, forgives you. So these are two questions which I want to ask concerning the Yud Gimel Midas. Therefore, now the answer to that is that the truth is that when we say there are 13 midas, 13 attributes, the truth is that there are not 13 different attributes. They are really all aspects of Tuvoi. That's all they are. If you remember the 13 attributes, Hashem, Kil, Racham, Chanan, Echapan, Mavches, Ve'emes, and so on, that all of them are different manifestations. They are different expressions of Tuvoi, of benevolence. In other words, there are different situations in which Tuvoi is manifested. That's all they are. But really, what are they all? They are all Tuvoi. In other words, they're the aspect of the Midah of Tiferes, which means the revelation or the giving to man of the benevolence of the Rabboni Shalom in different situations, at different times, and so on. These are the Yud Gimel Midas. So the Yud Gimel Midas are really one in terms of Tuvoi in different situations, and these, of course, are really all embodied in the idea of Tiferes. So that it really answers the first question. The second idea, that what Rabbi Yochanan said, that when the Rebbe said, Yasu lefonai keseder hazeh, let them perform before me this Seder, and therefore I will be meichel with them. So the question, of course, is, why, just by saying it, will the Rebbe be meichel? Interestingly enough, it says, the Rebbe says to Moshe Rabbeinu, not Yomru lefonai, let them say before me this Seder hazeh, but Yasu lefonai, let them perform this Seder, these midos. So therefore, God forgives Klal Yisrael, or He activates all these 13 attributes when we emulate those 13 attributes. The same idea. In other words, in response to man's, or particularly Klal Yisrael's, emulating, personifying the Yud Gimel Midas, therefore God, in response, activates or exhibits those Yud Gimel Midas to Klal Yisrael when they are in need of them. For instance, when they sin. In other words, we have the idea called Midah Keneged Midah, a measure for a measure, an act for an act. That since Klal Yisrael exhibits those Yud Gimel Midas, therefore justice demands that God act to them in accordance with those Yud Gimel Midas. So therefore, that is the idea why the Rebbe Shalom forgives Klal Yisrael for when they exhibit the Midas, not when they say the Midas. Now, the Yud Gimel Midas themselves are too extensive to be treated here. Actually, one can go into each one. But that's why I just wanted to finish off by saying that in terms of the Yud Gimel Midas, how they relate to the three Midas, which I have said, that they are really different expressions of Tuvoi in different situations. And so what you're really looking at is Tiferes, beauty, which is the last Midah, really in different situations or different forms. And that's really what the Yud Gimel Midas are. And that Klal Yisrael is zeicha, that the Rebbe Shalom relates to them through Yud Gimel Midas, when they, of course, emulate God, when they themselves perform the Yud Gimel Midas. So therefore it's Midah Keneged Midah. In other words, they deserve that God acts to them through the Yud Gimel Midas, through Din. In other words, they deserve it through the attribute of justice, not only because the Rebbe Shalom is a merachem to them, without the concept of Din. Now, since I'm mentioning this, I want to mention one more idea, and that is that when the Rebbe Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu that he wanted to destroy Klal Yisrael, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, prayed, the Rebbe Shalom in truth did not want to destroy Klal Yisrael. What the idea there was that it was a supreme test for Moshe Rabbeinu as a manik, as a ruler. And Moshe Rabbeinu understood that. It's like by Avraham Avinu, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm going to destroy Sodom, should I not tell Avraham what I'm going to do? Since when does the Rebbe inform Avram of everything he does? But the idea is that Avram had to know, because Avram in that case had an Nisayon. To what extent would he exercise his midah of chesed, even to pray for people who are very obviously great sinners? So therefore the Rebbe expresses to an individual what he's about to do, not necessarily because he wants to do that, because somehow it forms an Nisayon for the individual who he expresses it to. And that individual has to understand that through the Lashon that God tells him. Somehow the Rebbe gives him the hint of what he really is doing. And in the case of Avram, he really wanted to destroy Sodom, so what he wanted of Avram is, would Avram pray for Sodom? To what extent would he act on chesed? By Moshe Rabbeinu, what the Rebbe said is, Hanicheni li, leave me up, that I may destroy them. So Moshe Rabbeinu understood that if I don't leave, Moshe Rabbeinu understood that if you do not leave me up, what Moshe told Moshe Rabbeinu is, say nothing, don't talk to me, and let me destroy Klal Yisrael. So the fact Moshe Rabbeinu understood that if God tells him not to say anything, don't bother me, in other words, leave me, let me be. Therefore, if you don't let me be, I won't destroy Klal Yisrael. So the test of Moshe Rabbeinu was that as a new leader, because the golden calf was mamash right after Yetzias Mitzrayim, would Moshe Rabbeinu, to what extent would he extend himself to save Klal Yisrael? Even though the Rebbe Shem said to him, I will make you an Ummah, and what the Rebbe Shem was really saying to Moshe Rabbeinu is that I will change the Masakin concept. Now, it won't be the children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but your children, even though you still come Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but I will single out your children as the new Masakin, which is the whole idea of what the Bris Ben Absarim was. So Moshe Rabbeinu understood that was his Nisayon, and of course he came completely in defense of Klal Yisrael. And he said, Mecheni no, of course, erase me from your sefer. He wasn't interested in he being the Masakin or his descendants. He wanted Klal Yisrael, of course, to be the Masakin, which of course was complete devotion and dedication to the Klal Yisrael, the people that he was leading. So this is what the Rebbe Shem tested Avram. To what extent would he be devoted as a true mani? And Moshe Rabbeinu understood that because of the Lashon of the Rebbe Shem, leave me. But if you don't leave me, if you pray for them, I won't. So Moshe Rabbeinu understood that there was a Pesach, there was an opening to pray for Klal Yisrael, because that is exactly what the Rebbe Shem wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to do, was to pray for Klal Yisrael. And of course, after that, the Rebbe Shem revealed to him the Yud Gimel Midas, the 13 attributes, that if Klal Yisrael emulates those 13 attributes, then they can always be saved from destruction. This is the idea I just want to mention, Agav, in terms of the Yud Gimel Midas. Now, we see so far the idea of the relationship of these Yud Gimel Midas to the three Midas, which is Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes. And also we see on what schus the Rebbe Shalom activates the Yud Gimel Midas. Okay, we've seen that. And we've seen also that the Yud Gimel Midas, of course, was presented at a time of a great Nisayon to Moshe Rabbeinu, that he had to understand to pray for Klal Yisrael. Now, just to further emphasize that the gematria, the numerical value of Echad, 13, Dalet is 4, Ches is 8, and Aleph, of course, is 1, is equal to 13. So the Yud Gimel Midas, the Midas are 13, which is exactly equivalent to the numerical value of 1, to show that all Midas are 1. That even though they look like 13, but essentially, of course, that all the attributes are really 1, as I have said. That all the Midas of the Rebbe Shalom is really Tuvoi, and in different situations, Tuvoi in different situations, and even if it is nothing more than Yud Gimel Midas. And even in the other Midas of the Rebbe Shalom, in terms of the absence of Tuvoi, it's only ultimately to bring Tuvoi or Hatova B'Shlemus. So therefore, it comes out that all the attributes and actions of God is tied up in an absolute unity of Tuvoi. And that's Merumah, in the fact that Yud Gimel is really Gematria of Echad. Also, that if you combine all the letters of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, you will see that there are 13 letters. Which tells us also that the combined totality of all the others, okay, the combined totality of the Avodah, the work of all the others, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, equals the Midas of the Rebbe Shalom. That they, as a group of three, unified and completed the Adam Kadmon, because each one worked independently and intensively on one particular aspect. So therefore the amount of letters in Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov equals 13 to tell us that the totality of the Avodah of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as three together equals the Midas of the Rebbeinu Shalom, which of course is Adam Kadmon. That's also another interesting remez in terms of the Midas of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And in terms of the last idea, in terms of the Midas of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that there are 12 tribes, but Yosef really is Menashe and Ephraim. So again, you have 13 tribes. Same idea. That the combined totality of the Avodah of all the Shvatim, again, is the complete Midas and the behavior and attributes of the Rebbeinu Shalom. In other words, that the Avodah of all 13 tribes taken as one is equal to the totality of the concept called Adam Kadmon. And this again is what I had mentioned previously, that the combined Avodah of each Jew in each unique area that he has to masaken, the combined totality equals the totality of Adam Kadmon. So we see it as manifested in the fact that the Ovas have 13 letters, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So therefore their combined totality of Avodah equals the Yud Gimel Midas, which is the idea, of course, of the Midas of the Bershom, which is Adam Kadmon, and the 13 tribes, okay, and that's really what they are, again is also their combined totality in terms of the Avodah equals to the totality of Adam Kadmon, which is the totality of the Midas of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Therefore, in the end, the Ovus and all Klal Yisrael is mashlim the Adam Kadmon. So therefore it comes out that all Jews literally resemble the Rebbeinu Shalom in terms of their physical structure, both anatomically and physiologically, and also in terms of the behavior. That the complete revelation that the Rebbeinu Shalom has to the Bria, his guise of Adam Kadmon, there's a complete coincidence with Klal Yisrael to that Adam Kadmon, and that is really the entire tachas of the Bria. I would like to close off the topic of the attributes and the actions of the Rebbeinu Shalom with this idea. In Shmona Esrei we say Hokel Hagorel Hagibur V'Hanero, God, the great, the mighty, and the awesome. When we describe the Rebbeinu Shalom in the Shmona Esrei, in the first bracha, it can only be obviously in terms of his midos or attributes, or that guise or identity that he reveals himself to us through. Therefore, Hagorel in the Shmona Esrei refers to the mid of Chesed. Gedula, as mentioned previously, is another word for Chesed. Hagibor refers to the mido or attribute of Gevura, and the Hanero, awesomeness, refers to the mid of Tiferes, because through Tiferes the universe can be created, maintained, and the Nerois, the awesomeness of the Rebbeinu Shalom, can be truly demonstrated and consequently observed and perceived by man. Thus, the three fundamental midos of the Rebbeinu Shalom is the way Hashem is praised and worshipped by us in our prayers in the Tefillah. We have spoken about many different ideas in the previous Shurim. The beginning Shurim, we spoke about the ideas or what transpired with Adam Rishon, what transpired with Hevel and Cain. Then after that we spoke about the events of Yosef and Yehuda, what transpired with those individuals. Then we spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jews in Egypt, and also what was some of the ideas in terms of the true significance of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. In addition, we then went into the spiritual concepts concerning the two Mashiachim. In other words, what are some of the ideas in terms of the Ruchnius or the spiritual framework of the Mashiachim, and what are the relationships of these ideas with the physical Mashiachim, those two individuals who are truly the Mashiach ben Yosef and the Mashiach ben David. Then, what we did, we saw that their tasks are really those tasks which govern all human history. In other words, that the governing or determining principles of all human history or events are the tasks of the Mashiachim. After that, we proceeded in terms of the essential ideas about Avraham Avinu, and then we proceeded in terms of understanding some of the concepts and the structure of these concepts underlying the term of or patriarch. What does this term really mean, especially in terms of Judaism? Then after that, we talked about some of the attributes and the actions of the Ribono Shel Olam, and what are the meaning of these ideas. Also, we talked about the notion or the concept of Tzelem Elokim, and also how these midos and pu'ulos of the Ribono Shel Olam, how these attributes and actions of God, of course, how they are emulated and personified by the Avos. This is what we had done so far until now. Now, to further continue to understand the basic theme or the plot of human events as they are determined by the two Mashiachim, this is basically, of course, our goal throughout this entire year. Now, as such, before I begin or before I continue, I'd like to mention that so far, just as a summary, that there basically has been three objectives to these shiurim. And that is that the first objective, or the first goal of this year, was to continue to describe the events concerning the two Mashiachim. Those actual kind of incidents that involve the two Mashiachim, and also the attempts by the Mashiachim, and of course together with Klal Yisrael, because Klal Yisrael shares the tasks of the two Mashiachim, and to understand their attempts with Klal Yisrael, and also the Ribono Shel Olam's attempts to masaken, to correct or to rectify the two necessary or required tikkunim of creation, which of course we know is the kilkul and the chesaron of creation. This we had discussed previously. And what we attempted, the objective of course, is to see how these things transpire throughout history. And as I had mentioned, that these of course ideas, the actual attempt of the Mashiachim and Klal Yisrael to bring the tikkunim to the Bria, of course, and also the attempt of the Ribono Shel Olam to bring the Moshe Mashiach, this is basically the determining principle of all history. Now, the second objective of which what we have been trying to accomplish here is basically to learn and to understand Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksubim, Lefi Pashtus. In other words, according to the obvious theme or the obvious plot, the plain or the simple meaning of the text. This is what we have been trying to do. In other words, the outward pshat, the external ideas of the Torah, and this is the chitzonis. And also, at the same time, what we have been trying to do is to perceive the inner or the internal or the pnimius theme or plot in the Torah. In other words, what constitutes the true or the real theme, the real understanding of the design, the plot or the story which is hidden in the Torah, this internal weave or thread. Now, this fundamental principle, and this is important to know, in seeing the inner theme in the Torah, is to realize a certain idea, and that is that the same words which are used in Tanakh, the same phrases which are used to expose or to indicate the plain meaning or the story, that these words and phrases which are used in Tanakh are also used simultaneously to reveal the plain meaning, or rather to reveal the internal or concealed theme. And of course they do this by serving either as remozim, as allusions to what is really going on, the true underlying hidden theme, or sometimes rather strikingly in the open, they actually tell you what the internal theme is. So this is of course the second objective that we have been trying to do, is to realize or to understand the external ideas or the theme and the internal theme or the design of all creation at the same time. Now, a third objective which we have been trying to do is to understand statements by Chazal, whether these statements be found in Midrashim, whether it be found in the Agadah, which of course is in the Gemara, or wherever they may be found. In other words, anywhere else. What we are trying to do is understand these statements both in their plain meaning, in their plain simple sense, in other words, the outwardly or the chitzonis understanding of the statements of Chazal. And what we have also been trying to do is to understand the statements of Chazal in their concealed or hidden inner meaning. In other words, the true internal pshat that is indicated in Chazal. The inward understanding or the pshat pnimis, the inward understanding, the internal ideas. This is what we have also been trying to understand in Chazal. Now, interestingly enough, of course, the same principle that applies to Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ksubim, which the Rabbi Shalom, of course, has wrote through his Nevi'im, the same principle applies to Chazal, those statements of Chazal. And what is that? That the same words or phrases which are used homiletically by Chazal in their statements, the same phrases or words which reveals the plain meaning is used simultaneously to reveal the inner concealed meaning of the true internal theme. And of course this is the seed or the secret that Chazal of course have to reveal to us. And of course this is understood either as remozim, as illusions, and sometimes it's realized openly in Pshat. Now, these three objectives is what we are trying to do for all these shiurim. Besides understanding the content of Hashkofa, we have been trying to understand both Tanakh and Chazal, both inwardly and outwardly. And we begin to see, of course, that there are both inward and outward meanings constantly in Chazal. What we begin to see, very interestingly enough, is an important methodological concept. And this concept, of course, arises from our studying of Chazal and also Tanakh. And that is, we begin to see that when the Torah or Chazal, when the Rabbi Shalom or Chazal want to reveal any of the Yesodis, those fundamental principles, or Sodis, those secrets of the internal design of creation, then what seems to be is that there is a peculiar treatment, or there is a very peculiar kind of manner of presentation that either the Rabbi Shalom or Chazal employ in order to indicate to us these internal Yesodis of the internal design of creation. What is that? Now, we know that the repository of all Hashkofa principles of the internal structure of the design of creation lies in Tanakh. And interestingly enough, what the Rabbi Shalom did, because he wanted it to be hidden from men, at least they have to work for it in order to understand it, is that he took these fundamental principles and he disguised them in the text. He disguised it by the plain meaning of the text. That is one way he hid it or disguised it, these fundamental ideas. The second way he hid these fundamental ideas in Tanakh is by various misholim or metaphors. He actually clothed or disguised the true interpretation, the true meanings or fundamental principles of creation in metaphors, as we find many times in the Torah. A third way the Rabbi Shalom hid that which of course is fundamental and basic to understanding the actual design of all creation is in the various midos. And the midos of course are the Yud Gimel midos, or the exegetical principles from which we derive different halachas and different drushes. This is the way the Rabbi Shalom hid those fundamental ideas, those esoteric or concealed ideas from mankind and also from the Jews. And what the Rabbi Shalom wanted, of course, is that these ideas should be communicated not in a rabbim or public way, but rather from one individual to the next, but that's another kind of discussion. In any case, this is the way the Rabbi Shalom hid it. In other words, the pshat, the plain meaning of the Tanakh itself, actually is a levush, it's a guise for those yesodis, for these fundamental principles which determine all creation. Now, that is the first way the Rabbi Shalom hid it. The second way he hid it, in other words, the first way he hid it is by clothing or disguising them in various midos, exegetical principles, metaphors, misholim, and even in the plain pshat or the plain meaning of the text. The second way the Rabbi Shalom hid those fundamental ideas is that what he did is he presented those ideas in an illogical sequence. It's not logically sequential. In other words, idea number 1 does not go first, and then idea number 2. You could find idea number 8 going first, and then idea number 1 going fourth, or whatever. So therefore it's very difficult to figure out what exactly is going on. In other words, there is a non-logical sequence of the fundamental ideas of the internal design of the Bria. This is the second way the Rabbi Shalom hid these ideas. The third way that the Rabbi Shalom hid these fundamental principles is that not only did he clothe or guise them in different ways, not only did he present them in an illogical sequence, I don't mean illogical, but rather the sequence is not proper. But what the Rebbeinu Shalom also did is he scrambled, he disorganized all these ideas into many different separate sections throughout Tanakh. In other words, you could find several ideas which really are related to one topic spread all over Tanakh. You could have one in Bereshis, the second one of course can be in Vayikra, and so on. So therefore he disorganized, or he scrambled these ideas all over Tanakh, and that is the third way the Rebbeinu Shalom hid those fundamental ideas. So therefore we see that the presentation of fundamental principles, that this is actually presented in such a way where the internal design of creation by the Rebbeinu Shalom in Tanakh, of course, is completely hidden in one of these three ways. Now, as such, we begin realizing that there are basically two levels of learning Torah. The first level, or level one, is what's called Pshat Niglo, Pshat Chitzoni. In other words, the open or the obvious Pshat or meaning of the Tanakh, the external meaning of Tanakh. And of course, this of course is intended for most Jews in order to understand, of course, the laws of the Rebbeinu Shalom and some of the ideas of what is transpiring in the Bria. However, this basically is intended for only those several few who can actually understand level 2, or rather I should say, now, besides the fact that there is a level 1, there is also a second level, and this is what becomes obvious to us now. And this level, of course, is Pshat Nistor, the Pshat Pnimi, or the internal ideas or the internal theme of what's really going on, of course, in Tanakh. And if we are talking about halachas, of course, what the underlying principle which determine all halachas. Now, interestingly enough, in order to understand this Pshat Nista, this hidden theme of the Torah, or these hidden rules or fundamental principles of the Torah, this demands an actual knowledge of the inner principles themselves and, of course, their structure, or the relationships between themselves, in order to understand the Pshat Nista in the first place. In other words, in order to understand Pshat Nista, the actual hidden meaning or the hidden theme of the Torah, one actually has to have a knowledge of those inner principles initially in order to even enter that portal. Now, in other words, before one can even figure out the further principles in the Torah, one already has to have certain initial principles in order to figure the further principles out. Now, you may ask then, where does one get this initial yesodis or fundamental ideas in order to begin to delve into the second level of Torah, which of course is the hidden or concealed meaning or theme in the Torah? Why? Since even these first principles cannot be gotten from simply learning Torah. So then if that's the case, where does one even approach or understand these first ideas? And the answer to that, of course, is by learning Hashkofa as a study in itself. When one studies Hashkofa, then one gets an understanding of certain first initial principles, and from that he is able to delve further into Tanakh and understand the concealed, the hidden theme or the plot of what is really taking place in terms of the fundamental principles of all creation. Now we see why, of course, the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, is so important to learn, and why it's so important to master his system, because they provide the necessary first internal principles which will help us to begin to work and truly understand Chazal itself and the very Torah itself. Now, what was said about the Torah, in other words, what was said concerning the methodological principles about the revelation of principles or yesodis in the Torah is also true of Chazal. What does that mean? We know that the repository of all statements, all ideas, or all the internal principles by Chazal on the internal design, the theme or the actual internal structure of creation, we know that these things are found in the Agadah, in Shas, and that they are also found, of course, in the Midrashim. Now, here too is important to note that they are concealed in the same manner as by the Torah. What does that mean? That the first idea or the first manner of their concealment is that these yesodis, they are disguised, they are guised or clothed in the actual statements or the ma'amorim of the Chazal themselves by the plain meaning, or rather the simple meaning of the statement. In addition, that they're also guised or clothed in the sense that they are concealed in metaphors, mishalom. This is the first way, of course, that the Torah, or rather the Chazal in this instance, conceals the actual fundamental principles of the internal design. Either they are disguised by the plain or simple meaning, or they are concealed in mishalom, or metaphors. The second way that they are concealed is that the Yesodis themselves, even though they are clothed or disguised, they are sequenced in an illogical pattern. In other words, there is an illogical sequence of the Yesodis in Chazal itself, even when they bother telling it to you. And of course, these ideas, of course, are disguised in general. But you would think at least that they should be in a logical sequence, but the answer is, the truth is that they are not. They are presented in an illogical sequence. Now, the third way that Chazal conceal is that these ideas or hidden principles are fragmented. They are disorganized in thousands of different various places, or thousands of various drushes all over Shas and Midrash. In other words, instead of all the related ideas or principles being in one Masechta, for instance, or one parak, we find all the ideas spread all through Shas and Midrash. So you can find the same idea, or a similar idea, in Masechta Shabbos, and the next time you may encounter an idea which is very similar to it, or part of that area, is Masechta Nida. Therefore we see that the third way Chazal concealed the internal principles, of course, is by disorganizing it, fragmenting it in all the thousands of various drushes all over Shas and the Midrash. Now, we see, very interestingly enough, that Chazal imitated the Torah in its manner, in their manner of presenting the Yesodis. They actually duplicated or imitated the Torah's methodology. In other words, that all concealed in various ways, that all these principles are concealed in different ways or different patterns. In this way they imitated the Torah. And actually there's a famous statement that says, Kol man tikun rabbonim. Everything that the rabbonim, the rabbis, the Chazal enacted, ke'en diraisa tikun, is similar to the way the Torah made the same enactment. And we can actually say the same thing, that the exact same way the Torah concealed the internal principles, to that exact pattern and method the Chazal also imitated it. So we can apply that Kol man tikun rabbonim ke'en diraisa tikun also applies to the methodological procedure of how they concealed internal principles. Now, therefore, by Chazals also, as a result of the previous aforementioned, we also see that there are two levels of understanding in every Maimah Chazal. One is the Pshat Nigla, or the Pshat Chitzoni, that which is the apparent Pshat, or meaning of the text. The second level of understanding, of course, which is the more profound and deeper, is called Pshat Nisto or Pnimi, the hidden or concealed meaning of what the Maimah really says. Now, to be carefully understood, in other words, in order to decipher this second level, one needs an initial knowledge of principles of the internal design, which of course is concealed. And one of course has to have a knowledge of the relationships among these principles, or rather the structure. Now, how can this be gotten? And the answer is, it can only be gotten from a conscientious effort and study at Hashkafa itself. That again is why Chazal, or rather, that is again why the Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, is so important. Because he offers uniquely a comprehensive, properly organized, and then it's of course properly sequenced. In other words, all the ideas are in the same area, and they are of course in a logical sequence. In addition, a structured and well-defined conceptual framework or system of these underlying principles of Hashkafa. That is what the Ramchal offers, and that's why he's so important really to engage in a serious way. In addition, the system of the Ramchal, of course, is authoritative. Why? Since it interprets and explains the Kabbalah Sari, because actually the system of Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, of course, is based par excellence, of course, on the Kabbalah of the Ari himself. And as such, of course, the Kabbalah Sari is the true internal system of all creation. Now, this idea, or rather this methodological principle, which I have just mentioned, both in Chazal and also both in the Torah, of having a Pshat Nigla and a Pshat Nista, the first idea, The second idea is that this Pshat Nigla and this Pshat Nista is actually contained in the same text. And the third idea is that the manner in which the inner Pshat is concealed, those three ways which I have mentioned, both in the Psukim of the Torah and also by the Chazal in their homiletical statements, is really alluded to in this Maimar of the Chazal. In other words, in this Maimar of the Chazal, which I'm going to say now, it really alludes to exactly the methodological principle itself. And interestingly enough, as we shall see, that this itself is hidden in this very Maimar. Not only are the principles hidden, but the actual Chazal which tells you the methodological principle itself is hidden. How do we see this? The Gemara in Bava Basra says that Shivrei Luchos Menochem Bi'oran. What does that mean? We know that the first Luchos were broken by Moshe Rabbeinu at the Chet of the Egel. We know that Klal Yisrael, of course, didn't deserve the Luchos Rishonos, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu, when he saw the sin of the golden calf, he broke the first Luchos. Now, after that, the Luchos Achronis were given. In other words, there was a later pair of Luchos which were given to Klal Yisrael. And we know that these second Luchos were kept in the Aron HaKodesh. Now, Chazal say in this Maimar in Bava Basra that what happened to the Shivrei Luchos Rishonos, what happened to these original broken shards of the first Luchos? So Chazal say they are also kept in the Aron. Shivrei Luchos Menochem Bi'aron. They are also kept in the Aron. And Rashi very interestingly says that these shvarim, they were located underneath the Luchos Achronis. In other words, you had the Luchos Achronis, and then on the bottom of the Aron, which obviously were concealed by these Luchos Achronis, you had the Shivrei Luchos Rishonos. This is the Gemara, and this is what Rashi says. Now, we can ask, other than the plain, simple idea which Chazal seem to be saying, which is some kind of interesting historical fact, that, by the way, what happened to the Luchos Rishonos, those shvarim, those broken pieces, they happen to be also in the Aron HaKodesh. What are Chazal really saying? To apply, of course, the philosophy, of course, of learning, that whenever Chazal say something, there's always two levels. So the question of understanding. So the question is, what really is Chazal saying? Are they merely saying some kind of interesting historical fact, some kind of interesting footnote after the event of Shvira, that, by the way, whatever happened to those original Luchos, they happen to be also in the Aron HaKodesh? Or are they rather revealing some kind of profound concept? And the answer, of course, is that they are, of course, revealing a profound concept, which I shall demonstrate. Now, we know that the repository of all internal principles, the storage place of all themes, internal themes, of course, lies in the Torah. Okay? And, of course, these, of course, are concealed. Now, let's take a look at those three components of that Maimon. We know there's an Aron, we know there's Luchos Achronis, the second pair of Luchos, and we know there's Luchos Rishonos, the first pair of Luchos. Now, these are three things which, of course, are mentioned by that Chazal, that particular Maimon. Now, let's take a look at each one. And we will see that each term, each thing, really represents metaphorically some aspect of Torah. Take a look at the Aron. The Aron, of course, is visible to man. As such, the Aron is the vehicle or the visible medium, that expressive mode of how Torah is revealed or communicated to man. In other words, how is the Torah express itself to man? How do we see the actual ideas of Torah? And the answer is, we see it in the letters, the words, the phrases, the sentences, which of course constitute the language, and we see it in the parchment and the ink. These things, the language, the parchment and the ink, of course, is the expressive mode of how the Torah reveals its ideas. That, of course, is metaphorically represented by the Aron, which is visible to man, just like the Aron is visible to man. Now, let's take a look at the second entity or thing, which is the Luchos Achronis, the second pair of Luchos. This metaphorically represents the second form of Torah, okay, which means that Torah is in the form of a script for avodah, or the task. In other words, when Torah wants to tell us what the task of man is, this is represented by the second Luchos, because on the Luchos there are mitzvahs, correct? So obviously, the fact that you have second Luchos represents Torah, or the ideas of Torah, in terms of their purpose to explain to man what his task or avodah is. This, of course, these second luchos are representative of the Torah that we now have. Now, let's take a look at the first luchos, the luchos rishonos. What are they? These luchos rishonos, of course, are the first form of Torah, as the underlying framework of all creation. In other words, what the luchos rishonos really were was the Or Rishon, that Or Pnimi, which was revealed to Klal Yisrael at Matan Torah, at the giving of the Torah. Because we know that after Mitzrayim, the Gemara says that Paskalei Zoyama Shel Nochosh, that the kilkel of the Bria was removed. That poison which the Sitra Achra, or that influence that evil has over the universe, was removed. There was no Azor Hamor. And Klal Yisrael at the time of Matan Torah, of course, reached the level or the madrega of Adam Rishon before the Chet. Therefore, Torah, which was given by Moshe Rabbeinu, who was of course the Mashiach ben Yosef, should be in the form of the Or Pnimi. Therefore, the luchos rishonos were really Torah as exhibited or as expressed or as revealed in terms of the Or Pnimi. That Torah which would reveal all the intrinsic internal principles of all creation. Because the Yemais HaMashiach was about to be ushered in, therefore that Torah was in that form. However, since the Jews did the Egel, so the Egel restored that Zoyamor, that poison that the Sitra Achra put into the Bria, so therefore it reinstituted his control over the universe. So therefore, the Torah is no more in the form of Pnimi, of the hidden internal principles of creation. These were broken. And then these Shivei, of course, Luchos Rishonos, were placed in the Oren. Now, we now see, if that is the case, we now understand what each three of these things represent metaphorically. The Oren to the expressive mode of how the Torah is revealed, the Luchos Achronos to the second form of Torah, in the form, of course, of the Avodah, or the task. And the first form of Torah, the Luchos Rishonos, of course, is the Torah as it appears when it reveals all the internal ideas or principles of creation. Now, we see now that both forms of this Torah, whether it be the Nigla or the Chitzoni, which is represented, of course, by the second Luchos, and the form of Torah which is Nista or Pnimi, which of course is represented by the first Luchos, they were both in the same container, namely the Oren. Therefore we see that the Oren, or rather the same expressive mode or vehicle that is used for the second Luchos, is also used for the first Luchos. In other words, the same text which metaphorically is represented by the Oren would reveal both the outer and inner Torah. This is the first idea of that Chazal. The second idea is that the second Luchos, as said by Rashi, was on top of the first Luchos, which means that the first Luchos were concealed. In other words, the internal principles of Torah, or the internal principles of reality, were concealed by the second Luchos, or they were concealed by the external ideas of the Torah. And what does that mean? Therefore, we see that if that's the case, this immediately tells us that the inner principles of Torah, the hidden design, is going to be concealed by the outer principles, and both of them are going to use the same text. Now, to go further, we know also that the first Luchos were broken. Now, if you think a moment, when you have something which is broken, a broken vessel, what does that mean? It means that the broken parts, or the shvarim of this vessel, is first of all spread all over the place. In other words, that the parts which belong in one section are not even together. They're spread all over, all different sections. And certainly those parts in the same section are completely illogically sequenced, because that's what a broken article is. Now, we know that the first Luchos were also broken. So therefore, we see the next two ways of concealment of the Torah. Not only was the first Luchos concealed by the second Luchos, which means that the internal principles were hidden by the first, or external principles, in the sense that they were clothed or guised in various ways. The second idea is that since the Luchos were broken, therefore, parts of the Luchos that should have been together, that were together and were attacking in the same section, were not in the proper order. They were not sequenced, even though they were in the same section or the same part of the arm. Now, the second idea is that many parts of the Luchos were completely spread out throughout the entire Orah. In other words, it was completely disorganized. In other words, pieces that belonged really in one section of the Luchos Rishonos, the first Luchos, or one area, of course, was spread into other areas. We now see beautifully that the physical relationship of the Oren and the two pairs of Luchos, which of course were in it, coincides exactly and metaphorically with the textual and conceptual relationship of the external and the internal Torah completely. This is what Chazal allude to when they say that the Shivrei Luchos are really in the Aron. They allude to these 5 ideas. The first idea is that just like there are 2 Luchos in the Aron, there are 2 levels of Torah. The first level of Torah is the Pnimi or Chitzoni. The second level, of course, is the Nista or the Nigla. The second idea is just like both of these Luchos are in the same container, same Aron, therefore both of the Torahs, the Pnimi and the Chitzoni, are in the same text of the Torah. The same text of the Torah reveals both simultaneously. The third idea is that, remember, there are 3 ways of concealment of these internal ideas. The first way, of course, which is the third idea, is that since the second Luchos hide the first Luchos, therefore we see that the internal Torah is disguised by the second Luchos, which of course means that it's disguised by the plain meaning of the Torah, or it's disguised by the metaphors of the Torah, or it's disguised, of course, by the Yud Gimel Midas, by the 13 attributes where one derives the Torah. Therefore we see that this second idea, exactly how, or rather the third idea, exactly how the method of concealment takes place, of course, is exactly indicated by the metaphor of the physical relationship between the Luchos and the Aron itself. And we see, like just over there, that the first Luchos is hidden under the second Luchos. We therefore see that the internal Torah, as represented by the first Luchos, will be disguised by the second Luchos, which means, of course, disguised either by the plain meaning, disguised by the metaphors of the Torah, the external Torah, or disguised by the Yud Gimel Midas. Now, the fourth idea, or the second method of procedure of concealment, which we learn out from this Chazal, is that the Torah itself, the Pnimi, is not properly sequenced or ordered or arranged. In other words, even though the broken pieces are in the same spot in the Aron, obviously they're in complete disarray. They're in complete disarrangement. Now, the fifth idea, or the third method of concealment, and this is the fifth idea we learned from Chazal, is that the pieces obviously are fragmented and spread out all through the Torah, just like broken pieces. You have one piece which is supposed to be in one section is really in completely at the other end of the Aron. And something which is supposed to be at the other end of the Aron, of course, is in this end of the Aron, and so on. Therefore, we see beautifully that this Chazal is merames, or alludes to, by telling us that there are 2 Luchos in the Aron. Chazal are not telling us merely a nice historical fact, but they are telling us that this exact physical model truly represents the entire principle of methodology of how the Torah conceals the internal principles, and the fact that the internal principles are concealed in the first place. Now, what do we see so far? That this particular mimer reveals the principle of methodology of the internal principles of creation. Now, interesting to note, we see that not only is the internal design hidden in this manner through these principles, but we see that even Chazal, when they tell us about this particular principle of methodology, that they conceal it in themselves in a simple statement that the Shivrei Luchos are Menochem in the Aron, that the broken parts of the Luchos are really stored away in the Aron. They themselves hide the very methodological principle which they say is based, or rather determines the entire way the internal principles of the Torah is hidden themselves. A second interesting idea is the fact that this mimer itself provides a very good example of the fact that in the Agodic droshes of Chazal there are 2 levels of understanding. One is the simple or the plain meaning or understanding, and the second is the profound idea or concept. And we see that Chazal do not merely tell us a historical idea, but Chazal tell us, of course, in a plain meaning, what appears to be some kind of historical idea. That the Shivrei Luchos, the broken pieces of the first Luchos, are really contained in the Aron, or are really contained in the ark itself. But Chazal also say, and we see how this is indicated to us metaphorically, that the entire exact relationship between the Or Pnimi, the hidden internal principles of the Torah, how it stands exactly in relationship to the external principles of Torah, and that the metaphor, of course, exactly truly reveals that relationship itself. Now, as such, these shiurim will basically provide constant examples of seemingly innocent and innocuous statements by Torah and by Chazal, and how in essence they really reveal many profound and fundamental principles which are really part of the internal design of creation. And that is really one of the, as I had mentioned, one of the objectives of the Shurim. But in any case, to sum up, we now see that Torah and Chazal have both internal principles and external principles. That which appears obvious to us in the plain meaning of the text, and that which of course is the hidden principles of the design of creation itself. And that the same text that reveals the external ideas also reveals the internal ideas, and that these internal ideas are hidden in basically one of three ways. They are hidden because they are clothed or disguised in the plain meaning of the text, or they are disguised in metaphors, or they are disguised in the Yud Gimel Midas. This is the first way of concealment. The second way of concealment, as I had mentioned, is that the principles themselves, even though they are hidden, are illogically sequenced in the same area of the Torah. So, of course, it's much harder to figure out what's going on. And the third method of concealment, which I had mentioned, of course, is that the principles themselves are then taken and spread all over through the Torah, all over Shas. They are fragmented in all the thousands of different various drushes that Chazal say. This then is, of course, a statement, of course, of the principle of methodology of the Torah and Chazal, and also of the statement, of course, or the true idea that every Chazal and every pasuk in the Torah, of course, reveals both a simple and plain meaning, and also underneath it reveals, of course, a very profound and abstract idea. And as I mentioned, that's why it is very important to study Hashkafa as a study in itself, because only when one has the initial principles of Hashkafa, then one can actually one can then delve into the actual further profound ideas and fundamental principles of creation. One can then go into this, of course, with, of course, much profit. Now, beginning next week, we are going to begin to delve intensively, profoundly, and rather comprehensively into the topic of Yaakov and Esav, which is one of the most difficult topics in the entire Torah to truly understand. We are going to learn this topic not from the perspective of the plain and simple meaning or the pshat, which everyone knows and is basically familiar with, but rather from the standpoint of the internal design of creation. This topic of Yaakov and Esav, which runs through the different parashas of Parashas Toldos, Parashas Vayetze, and Parashas Vayishlach, will demonstrate in a strikingly clear pronouncement of what a topic looks like when it is seen from a fundamental and basic framework. This topic also will clearly indicate that just as this particular subject can be dealt with on such a profound level, so can all the topics in the Torah also be dealt with on that same level. One merely has to possess the initial fundamental principles. Now, however, time and practical considerations do not allow such development of the other areas of the Torah in such an extensive manner at this particular time. However, let this area of Yaakov and Esav, let this then serve then as a model and demonstration of the true profundity of the Torah that lies in all her gates.